Now, I'm guessing you, like me, you'd seen that the stories in the papers long before Joe Cox's horrific
Mm.
murder, where it had emerged that Brendan Cox had left to save the children after allegations from a number of women of him being something of a sex pest. Allegations since had emerged in the last week about him grabbing a woman by the throat, and another scenario which he was alleged to have put his thumb forced his thumb into a woman's mouth. Apparently, these are rather clumsy, drunken, sexual efforts, passes. But I have to say, pretty unpleasant and certainly unwanted. We can tell from the women who've made complaints subsequently, some to the police, some to their employer, and yet. A lot of this stuff was well known in the media. It was certainly well known in the political world, and yet this man was treated as a saint. Do you think the media was right to do that, given what had happened to his wife?
Absolutely not. And I think you're right. What happened is that his behaviour was whitewashed, and it was just pushed aside, brushed under the carpet because it was seen as being inconvenient. So we had a situation over the past year or so, past few months, where a politician who put his hand on someone's knee, as you will be aware, is turned into the great demon of the nation, who must be kind of, metaphorically pelted with rotten tomatoes and treated as some kind of modern-day devil. Whereas someone like Brendan Cox, who did things rather worse, although I think you're right that these can be seen as incredibly clumsy or worrying come-ons, but he did something worse in terms of behaviour. He is let off the hook. He is still allowed to play this role of having this kind of unimpeachable moral authority in relation to discussions about Brexit and racism and the new era of Trump politics and so on, because he was seen as playing a very useful role for certain sections of the chattering classes, which is that he had this moral authority almost to shut down discussion. Who would dare to criticize or contradict someone like Brendan Cox? So it's very worrying that his behavior was glossed over for so long because he was seen as being politically useful.
And that's the thing, isn't it? You mentioned Michael Fallon, of course, who lost his job over, among the allegations, touching money. Again, not because of me. I absolutely didn't think he should lose his job if that allegations were made. Toby Young, he's again right-wing, a Tory activist, and he lost his role advising on higher education. Damien Green, effectively the right-hand man to the Prime Minister, he lost his job because of looking at porn. Now, this is the thing. Now, yeah, there are specific reasons, obviously, each of these scenarios, and one can argue the rights or wrongs. And yet, all of these things, once they were known about, the media as a whole, and certainly the Labour Party as a whole, and Labour female MPs particularly, went hammer for tongs, absolutely attacking all three of these men as if they were, rapists. Frankly, they were borderline child abusers. Even though they'd sent, one of them had looked at porn, and one of them sent some tweets about the size of a woman's breast, and yet. They knew all along, because the allegations were in the public domain, that Brendan Cox had lost a job, had left a job at Save the Children, because a number of women, not one, a number of women had made allegations against him. There was a disciplinary hearing. He chose not to give evidence, and he chose to leave. So, and he has now admitted these sex pest allegations, and there are other police complaints even just a month later after that. Now, the fact that there was far more evidence of far worse wrongdoing against Brendan Cox, and that he was given a free pass, and these other men weren't. I'm not saying any of them should be given a free pass necessarily, but are we looking at double standards where if you are on the left, if you are, for instance, a Remain campaigner, you get a free pass to do pretty much anything you want?
Complete and utter double standards. And it really demonstrates that if you are one of these people's friends, if you're on their side, if you share their views, they will give you a far freer ride, to the extent that they will not even raise questions about your behaviour, even if they're aware of it, even if they know that it's in the public domain to a certain extent. But if you're not on their side, if you are against them, if you are a Brexiteer of all things, which is the worst thing you can be in their eyes, then they will destroy you. And they will destroy you over the smallest things, even if you have just effectively asked a journalist on a date, which is what some politicians have been accused of doing, this awful, terrible crime. Or if you wrote, childish kind of witty tweets, as Toby Young did, and he was turned into, the most evil person in the nation. They will destroy you ruthlessly if you're on the opposite side to them and have done one thing they consider to be a misdemeanor. If you're on the same side as them, they will let it go. They will let it ride. They will let you off. I find that extraordinary, and not only does that point to some ugly, ugly double standards, but it also calls into question the whole basis of the Me Too Time's Up movement, which looks increasingly, to me anyway, like a very politicized movement, where it is people of a certain political persuasion using these issues and these events to really destroy people they don't like, or to improve their own standing in public life, or to pursue some kind of narrow political gain. If this was a genuine movement against sexual harassment or sexual misconduct, then we should expect to see across the board people who have committed certain.
Well, to be fair, I mean,
incidents being treated fairly.
Harvey Weinstein was a Democrat donor, and Hillary Clinton and Obama and the like. I mean, so he was very much on the left.
Weinstein is one, but I think that there is unquestionably a differential treatment depending on what kind, particularly within the Pestminster scandal and within the British context.
Let's talk about. I mean, yesterday, Jess Phillips, Labour MP, a big campaigner on this issues about women being sexually harassed. She insisted, that she's obviously a very good friend of Joe Cox's and is a very good friend of Brendan Cox, and she was still defending Brendan Cox. Lucy Powell, MP, again a very, very close friend of Joe during her life, said, "Good for Mr. Brendan Cox," which is his Twitter handle, reflecting and taking responsibility for past actions. Now, I mean, let's be honest. I know how newspapers work. The only reason that Brendan Cox gave an interview to the Mail on Sunday and gave them quotes was because they had him banged to write. And there was no choice, and he had to do it. And you're always better off doing the interview and trying to get some sort of sympathetic coverage. I'm sorry, that's how things work in newspapers. But do you find it extraordinary? Could you imagine a scenario in which a female Labour MP who's campaigned on issues of sexual harassment would actually just say, good on Michael Fallon for resigning, good on Toby Young, good on Damien Green? Could you imagine that happening?
Never. And that's where you can see how this has become entirely politicised. Within the British context, within the discussion about abuse within Parliament or the British media or in British campaigning circles, you have an incredible double standard where someone like Jess Phillips will treat, if someone sends her a mean tweet, it's held up as kind of, evidence of the patriarchy bearing down on her and trying to destroy her and so on and so forth. Whereas someone like Brendan Cox, because she was, of course, friends with Joe and she's friendly with Brendan and the family, she gives him a much softer approach. So double standards are really being exposed as we speak, and lots of ordinary people can see this and are really calling into question the whole nature of what's going on at the moment. But the real problem, I think, with the Brendan Cox phenomenon, as you said earlier, everyone feels incredible sympathy for Brendan for what he went through, and an unspeakably awful experience. But then the transformation of him into this kind of super moral spokesperson for the Remain camp, effectively, or for people who don't like the way in which politics is going, that's the real problem. That's what really grated against people, and that's what led to his behaviour being whitewashed. So there was a real drive to turn him, as you say, into this saintly figure, and as a consequence, everyday discussion about politics and about his behaviour was really warped.
I mean, the key thing is, in any of these scenarios, whatever someone does in their walk of life, no one should be, above a question ever. Thank you very much, Brendan O'Neill, editor of Spiked Online. Thank you for that. I know, Christian Wolmar, you wanted to come in on this. You're a Labour activist. You must have some question marks about the double standards. Certainly, these women Labour MPs.
Hold on a sec here. I mean, this is, idea that kind of people of a slight left-wing persuasion get off things and people of a right-wing persuasion are attacked.
I think
come
that
on,
is
why
what's
is
happening
that?
now.
That was what? No, come on,
I really
come
do.
on, come on, Julia. For once we're disagreeing with each other this morning, which thank God, we've agreed on too much. But come on, the press is absolutely dominated by right-wing newspapers.
But
the Sun. They didn't
cover it because he was untouchable.
No, they're absolutely not.
No,
true.
it would have seemed tacky and nasty to attack him. He lost his wife, for God's sake.
You've just had kind of 15 minutes of Brendan O'Neill spieling kind of complete rubbish about this. Let me just have a word about it. You have a media that is completely dominated by right-wing papers, and yet here you are saying, oh, these nice liberal people get off lightly. The right-wing papers are absolutely full of attacks on left-wing establishment figures. And, you gave the example of Harvey Weinstein. There's all sorts of other people on the left who have been attacked for what they've done. And the idea that there's some sort of conspiracy or dual... Anyway, and Jess Phillips actually said she agreed that Brendan Cox had to go. And
well,
she was quite...
She did. She couldn't say anything else.
She was critical of him.
She was very... she was not as critical as him as she would have been about any one of any other different political
Last
parties.
point, you can't say that, when right-wing people are attacked, their friends go on TV and say, they behaved very well. Come on. There's an equivalence here, and I don't think there's some sort of conspiracy.
I think Lucy Power's tweet, good on Brendan. I genuinely, I'm appalled by that. I really am.
People tweeting things in favour of Michael Fallon when he resigned,
because I didn't know, because I didn't think that Michael Fallon should have to lose his job because he touched my knee 15 years ago. I was very straight about it.
There's an extreme liberal sensitivity, I think, hypersensitivity almost right now, and I would agree with you entirely. I think regardless of who the individual is,
me, of course.
Well, Julia, I know which side my bread's buttered. But I think in terms of Brendan Cox, I've never met the man. I don't know him personally. But you're absolutely right. And I've been behind the scenes on certain cases where the papers will come forward. The individual is bound to rights. They don't have a choice and they have to fall on their sword. I think we've got to be really cynical these days.
I think we do need to be more cynical these days. The time now is 8:48. Let's be cynical about an update on the travel. This is Talk Radio.